He was a prince who gave up an entire kingdom, a seeker who literally stared down death, and a teacher whose ideas are still echoing, 2,500 years later? It's incredible. But, behind all those statues and the deep philosophy, there was a real person on this just extraordinary quest. So today, let's unpack the story of the man who woke up. Okay, so when you see a statue of the Buddha, what comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's this kind of mythic figure, right? A distant symbol. But what if I told you that statue represents a real, historical person? I mean, a guy with a name and a family. We're talking about Siddhartha Gautama from the Shakya clan. He's the man who would eventually become known as Shakyamuni Buddha, which just means the sage of the Shakyas. So that begs the question, right? Who was this guy before he became the awakened one? What was his life actually like, inside those palace walls? Well, that's exactly the journey we're going to go on today. We're going to trace his path from a privileged prince to a profound philosopher, a man who, let's be honest, would go on to change the world. All right, so our story kicks off with a setup that sounds almost like a fairy tale, a prince who seemingly has everything you could ever want. But as we're about to find out, the real problem wasn't about what he had, it was all about what he was missing. So, Siddhartha Gautama was born into this noble family in a place called Lumbini, which is in modern-day Nepal. His dad was a king, and he had huge plans for his son. He wanted him to be this great universal ruler, a Chakravartin. So, what does he do? He basically builds a bubble around Siddhartha, filling his life with every imaginable pleasure and shielding him from anything, unpleasant. But here's the thing. Despite all that luxury, Siddhartha felt this deep, profound emptiness inside. That hollow feeling that all the money and comfort in the world just can't touch? And that really brings us to the core question of his early life, doesn't it? I mean, what could possibly be so powerful that it makes a guy give up a kingdom, his family, a life of total guaranteed comfort? The answer, it turns out, was waiting for him right outside the palace walls. So on a few trips out of the palace, Siddhartha runs into what are now called the 4 signs. First, he sees an old man, and for the first time, he truly grasps the reality of aging. Then, he sees a sick person, and it hits him. Disease is unavoidable. And then the third sight, a corpse. This teaches him about death. I mean, these 3 things just completely shake him to his core. He realizes that suffering is just a part of life. But then came the 4th sight, a calm, wandering monk. And that showed him something else entirely. A different possibility. A path to maybe, just maybe, find a way out of all this suffering. So inspired by that monk, at 29 years old, Siddhartha makes a decision that is, it's radical. He walks away from it all. The palace, his wife, even his newborn son. He leaves everything behind to start his search for the truth. He literally cuts off his hair, trades his fancy royal robes for simple cloth, and becomes a wandering ascetic. But here's what's crucial. His goal wasn't just personal. He wasn't just trying to fix his own problems. He was searching for a universal truth, a solution to suffering that could help everyone. He started by studying with 2 really famous teachers, and he got good. I mean, he mastered their meditation techniques. But he still felt like their paths didn't go all the way. They weren't the final answer he was looking for. So what does he do? He sets out on his own, and for the next 6 years, he pushes his body and mind to the absolute edge. We're talking extreme self-denial, fasting until he was just skin and bones. But all that intense hardship, it didn't get him any closer to the truth. And this is where he has this huge breakthrough. He realizes that neither extreme works. The life of total indulgence back in the palace, empty. But this life of severe self-punishment, that was a dead end too. The real path, he figured, had to be somewhere in between, a middle way. Okay, so now that he's rejected both extremes, Siddhartha travels to a place we now call Bodh Gaya. And there he finds a peepal tree, which will become famous as the Bodhi tree, sits down, and gets ready for the final leg of his quest. And he makes this incredibly powerful vow. He promises himself he will not get up from that spot until he has found the truth, until he has attained full enlightenment. And he sits there in deep meditation for 49 days. The stories say he was tempted by this demon, Mara, who threw everything at him, desire, fear, doubt, you name it. But Siddhartha didn't budge. He stayed completely focused. And then, finally, he broke through. He woke up. He saw the true nature of reality for what it was. And in that moment, at 35 years old, Siddhartha Gautama wasn't just a prince or an ascetic anymore. He had become the Buddha. Now, here's something that's really cool to understand. Buddha isn't his name. It's actually a title. It means the awakened one, or the one who is awake. It's like he had finally woken up from the dream or the sleep of ignorance. But getting enlightened wasn't the finish line, not at all. It was actually a new beginning. See, he had found the answer to suffering, and now he had a huge choice to make. Does he just keep it for himself, or does he share it with the world? Well, he chose to teach. He went to a place called Deer Park in Sarnath, found the 5 guys who had left him earlier, and gave his very first sermon. And with that, he set the wheel of his teachings in motion.
So where does he start? He starts by tackling the fundamental problem he set out to solve in the first place, something he called dukkha. Now, you often hear this translated as suffering, but it's a bit deeper than that. Think of it more like a constant underlying dissatisfaction. It's that feeling of unease that comes from knowing that everything, good times, our health, life itself, is temporary. It's that friction we feel because we're always resisting the fact that things change.
And I think this next part is just brilliant because it shows you his whole approach. He laid out his teachings exactly like a doctor diagnosing an illness. Step 1, identify the problem, the suffering, or dukkha. Step 2, find the cause of the problem, which he said was craving and our attachment to things. Step 3, confirm that there is a cure, that there's a way to end the suffering. And finally, step 4, write the prescription, the path to actually achieve that cure. This super clear logical framework, that's what we call the 4 Noble Truths. So, what's the prescription? What is this path? Well, it's that middle way he discovered from his own life. Remember? It's all about balance. It's an approach to life that avoids the extremes. No more chasing every pleasure, but also no more inflicting pain on yourself. It's designed to be a practical, totally livable philosophy for finding freedom right here in the middle of our everyday lives. Okay, so this prescription has a name, the Noble Eightfold Path. And you can really just think of it as a complete guide to living well, to living skillfully. It's broken down into 3 main categories. First up is wisdom, which includes right view and right intention, basically seeing things clearly and having good intentions. Then you have ethical conduct, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. This is all about living in a way that doesn't cause harm to yourself or anyone else. And finally, there's mental discipline, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is about training your mind to be focused and aware. Put them all together, and you've got a practical roadmap for a life of compassion, clarity, and balance. And for the next 45 years, that's what he did. The Buddha just walked the plains of India, teaching. And he taught everyone. It didn't matter if you were a king or a servant. He also established the Sangha, which is the community of monks and nuns, to make sure his teachings would be carried on long after he was gone. Okay, now here's something I find super interesting. This entire story we've just talked about, it's all encoded in the art and the statues we see today. You know that common pose where his right hand is touching the earth? That's a specific gesture called the Bhumi Sparsha Mudra, and it represents the exact moment he called on the earth to witness his enlightenment as he faced down Mara. The bowl in his lap, that symbolizes his life as a monk. And the lotus flower he's sitting on, that's all about purity rising up from the mud of our everyday world. It's all right there in the symbolism. So, at 80 years old, he knew his life was coming to an end. He traveled to a place called Kushinagar, lay down between 2 sala trees, and gave his final instructions to his followers. And there, he passed into what's called parinirvana. You can think of it as the final nirvana, the ultimate release, the end of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And his last words, as they've been passed down, are really a perfect summary of his entire message. He said, "All sankharas decay. Strive for the goal with diligence," which in plain English basically means everything is temporary, everything changes. So don't waste your time. Pay attention, be mindful, and put in the work to find your own freedom. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on, doesn't it? The story of the Buddha, it's not just some old historical account. It's a really profound look at what it means to be human. It asks a question that is just as relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago. In a world that's always changing, a world full of uncertainty, how do we find real, lasting peace?